Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture in this benighted age, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes or by plugging our RSS feed into your favorite podcatcher. You can find the RSS feed on our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/vm. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on Spotify, YouTube, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And visit patreon.com/vmspod or paypal.me/vmspod to make a one-time or recurring donation and help me continue to produce smart conversation about books, art, comics, and culture every week at the Virtual Memories Show. Still not feeling like talking too much about myself this time around. I got a lot of work going on, and the combo of that and the unendingness of this whole situation is it's grinding me down a lot lately, but I'll rally. So let's get to this week's show. Now, my guest this time around is Benjamin Taylor, who has a new memoir out, Here We Are, My Friendship with Philip Roth. As you can imagine, this is something I've been looking forward to for quite a while. Here We Are is published by Penguin Books, and honestly, the subtitle covers it, Friendship and Philip Roth. Taylor chronicles how their relationship began and evolved, and has these beautifully crafted anecdotes about their conversations over dinners, explorations of Roth's later novels, how they came together. And he also gets into like the laughs and easy humor that friends can share. And that's one of the toughest things to capture, and Taylor does it wonderfully. And he really does get at what friendship means, not just doing the I'm going to observe Philip Roth thing, but it's much more about the interactions between these two men. And he doesn't shy away from some of the, we'll say, salacious aspects of Roth's life, the affairs, Roth's need to anguishedly relitigate both of his failed marriages, but he also doesn't gossip or anything. I will note that this very day brings us the news that Blake Bailey's biography of Roth is coming out in April of 2021. I'm hoping to record with Blake about that. Now, the thing is, Here We Are, well, it carries a third theme that's implicit in the other two. Roth died in 2018, and Taylor explores that loss throughout the book, and how we keep the conversation going even after our friends are gone. And we get into what that means for me in losing a close friend in the past year or two. Here We Are is a lovely book, and it's about one of my favorite writers and what the world is like without him and what it was like to have him close for years. It's a lovely meditation on friendship and the literary life and I guess the literary death, too. Now, I enjoyed a few of Taylor's previous books, The Hue and Cry at Our House, a memoir of his childhood, his short bio of Proust, Proust the Search, and most of all, his travel memoir, Naples Declared. Taylor is a gorgeous, thoughtful writer who draws connections in ways that I envy. Some of these things I've thought of but couldn't imagine stitching together and bringing these connections to life as well as he does. I wish, ultimately we'd gotten together a few years earlier, if only because maybe he could have helped me approach Roth about a podcast, but I'm awfully glad we got to talk about Here We Are. Now, as caveats go, his audio levels weren't too high, but I fixed that up in post. I just didn't want to potentially derail the conversation by trying to walk him through the technical aspects of increasing mic levels and making him self-conscious, etc. Here's Benjamin's bio. Benjamin Taylor's family memoir, The Hue and Cry at Our House, received the 2018 Los Angeles Times Christopher Isherwood Prize and was named a New York Times Editor's Choice. His Proust, The Search, was named a Best Book of 2016 by Thomas Mallon in the New York Times Book Review, and his Naples Declared, A Walk Around the Bay, was named a Best Book of 2012 by Judith Thurman in the New Yorker. He is also the author of 2 novels, Tales Out of School, winner of the 1996 Harold Ribelow Prize, and The Book of Getting Even, winner of a Barnes & Noble Discover Award. He edited Saul Bellow, Letters, named a Best Book of 2010 by Michiko Kakutani in the New York Times and Jonathan Yardley in the Washington Post, and Bellow's There Is Simply Too Much to Think About, collected nonfiction, also a New York Times Editor's Choice. His edition of the collected stories of Susan Sontag, Debriefing, was published by FSG in 2017. Taylor is a founding faculty member in the New School's Graduate School of Writing and teaches also in the Columbia University School of the Arts. He is a past fellow and current trustee of the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation and serves as president of the Edward F. Albee Foundation. His new book is Here We Are, My Friendship with Philip Roth. And now, the Virtual Memories Conversation with Benjamin Taylor. In a previous book of yours, you mention a line from Hemingway, inspired by Huck Finn, that kind of informs you that what is moral is what you feel good after, and what's immoral is what you feel bad after. And my question is, do you feel good about Here We Are?
Hemingway says that in Death in the Afternoon, and it has become a kind of banner for me, banner under which I go forth. It's enough of a moral creed to live by. And yes, indeed, I feel very good. I felt peaceful. I also, as I've gotten older, have had a feeling that I think is proper to old age rather than youth, which is the feeling that everything that happened is still happening.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing is lost that seems to be lost, and nothing wasted.
And that fits the mode in which Here We Are is written. Sorry, where recollections, it's a present tense book, I guess. You know, you're flashing into different times without, establishing things necessarily being the past.
Yes, I did decide to favor the present tense for the reasons just stated.
When did you come to that feeling about life? And you mentioned it's a sign of, we'll say, advancing age or late middle, however you want to define it. When did that occur to you?
When I realized that fiction wasn't the only worthwhile game in town, which I had believed when I was younger. I wasn't very interested in memoir. I had read a few. I think I had read The Education of Henry Adams and didn't like it, and The Confessions of Rousseau in French class in college, and I really didn't like that. And I thought that autobiography was simply a closed department of literature. But there came a moment, I think it may have been the moment when I knew I was at the end of middle age, chronologically speaking, when it seemed to me like enough of a task just to try to say what actually happened. And that I did in a trilogy of memoirs, Naples Declared, The Hue and Cry at Our House, and Here We Are.
Mm-hmm. How do you think your friendship with Roth affected your writing?
Philip had a strongly percussive prose style. First on view, famously important as complaint, with him in various permutations from there on. And richly insistent, even argumentative sentences and paragraphs. I knew that any attempt to imitate that style in the memoir would be fatal to it. And I had no wish to imitate that style. I had another stylistic model, not Philip, not Saul Bellow, but and not Hemingway, but Willa Cather was the always the beau ideal for me. I've always felt that's how prose ought to be. That's what it ought to do. And so stylistically, I don't in any way derive from these two men who were so important to me, Saul Bellow, whom I never met, and Philip, with whom I spent thousands of hours. Similarly, when I wrote my biography of Proust, I knew that I needed a prose style as nearly the opposite of Marcel Proust's as possible.
Certainly, yeah. Yeah, I've read that, I guess, last weekend, and it was a wonderful biography and written anti-Proustianly, which I appreciated because
yes, that was the rule I gave myself. Don't Proustify.
Excerpts were enough, that conveys the style. But did you feel that the friendship, not stylistically, but otherwise, impacted you in terms of writing, even when it came to launching into memoir as you did? Or do you feel that was, I know it'd be very difficult to extract threads of your life, I suppose, when you were that close to someone.
Philip taught me how to work harder and encouraged me to take myself seriously as a professional writer. And I became a professional because of him.
Do you feel you affected? You mentioned reading in manuscript the last 5 or so novels. Beyond just any sort of editorial input, do you feel there are ways that your friendship affected his writing?
Well, he had an interesting method. When a book was ready to be seen, there were about 6 or 8 of us who would get a copy of it, and he would always ask me to come over to if we were in New York or if we were in the country and I was staying with him. He would turn on a tape recorder for our conversation, and then afterward listen. He did this, and he took notes. So he was very intent on the response of his initial group of readers, who included Judith Thurman and the historian Sean Wilentz and Claudia Roth-Pierpont and several others. And those sessions were very memorable. He wanted to talk about what the inner subject was, what the theme was. He never thought in terms of theme when writing, only storytelling. But what was underneath all the words was what he wanted to get at in those conversations. And they don't exist anymore because he would always record over them with somebody else.
Did you feel confident from the outset giving him that sort of feedback? Were you ever, I guess, in a sense, intimidated or otherwise telling him what he might want to hear versus what you thought?
There was a strong element of filial piety in my side of this friendship. He was a generation older than me, and I have had a reverent feeling about that generation of people, and felt a little in awe of them when you consider what they accomplished. Those were people who were little children in the Depression, and they saw fear in their parents' eyes, and it made workhorses of them. Think of the productivity of Joyce Carol Oates, John Updike, Reynolds Price, people who brought out a book every year, and Philip and other extraordinary figures of that generation. Cynthia Ozick among the most outstanding, I think. William Gass. These people born in the 20s and the early 30s. Did I feel I was in their shadow? No, I felt I was in their light. And I also felt a certain reverence. And yes, occasionally intimidation. But, that was not really native to the friendship. The emotion of friendship is one of equality, even when the one party is a genius and the other party merely talented or competent, which I was. When we were friends, when we were talking or laughing, we were made equal by the emotion of friendship, despite the tremendous disparity between us.
Did you ever have a why me question about that? Why I don't want to say selected, but when he reached out to you for that initial call and the friendship bloomed from there?
No,
Is it something you ever questioned?
No, but I think I know what the qualities in myself were, traits in myself were that he responded to. Above all, an intellectual earnestness that he found refreshing and akin to his own. He's a great student of everything, Philip. And he liked that about me. And I suppose we found the same things funny. That was very important.
That carries a lot. that goes a long way.
That really matters a lot in friendship and in love.
You mentioned the filial piety. Did you ever think about whether he could have handled being a father? We know marriage was not his thing, but
I said to him once, "Are you sure you're not a father?" And he said, "I'd know by now if I were. I would have heard from them by now." He enjoyed other people's children, but the thing about other people's children is that they're picked up and carried away at the end of the afternoon. Then you go back to your quiet life. He absolutely he wanted art. He did not want parenthood, and in this respect, he was quite different from, say, Saul Bellow, a man who would not have felt whole without fatherhood, even though nobody thinks of Saul Bellow as the father of the year. He had to have those children.
Yeah, it's sort of again what I wonder about the domestic life versus what you sacrifice and what he imagined the domestic life was like. And my wife and I serve as the crazy aunt and uncle for my brother and his wife and their kids. So I get the whole, they're gone at the end of the day. That's perfectly fine.
Yes. I'm very grateful to be an uncle, but I don't anguish about not having children. And I know lots of women who've felt entirely fulfilled without having children too. Some, maybe 30% of my women friends don't have children. I'm thinking, for example, of Vivian Gornick. I asked her, we go on long walks together. That's how, one of the ways I've gotten through the pandemic. She's an extraordinary conversationalist and an extraordinary walker at 85. She exhausts me. And I asked her if she had ever wanted to have children. She said, for 1 year, I desperately wanted to have a child. And then it was over, and I'm very grateful now not to. I don't know how common that is among women. very often, fatherhood is something that happens to a man rather than something he chooses.
It varies.
It didn't happen to Philip, and I think he was grateful.
Mm-hmm. Now, the flip side of heterosexual domesticity, do you think he got what gay life is like? I mean, you have that one story where he tells you about, quote unquote, his homosexual experience, and you laugh it off. As, Philip, that was not a homosexual experience.
Yes.
Now, I will say, as a sidebar, I published Samuel Delaney, who lived around the corner from the great Thai restaurant where you guys ate, by the way, Rain.
Rain, yes.
Now kills me because I like to imagine that I was there the same time you guys were at some point, just so I could have had some proximity to Philip. But reading Delaney's letters and other work that I published of his, gay life is, well, his particular gay life is very, very different than anything we sort of conceived of as boring people in the suburbs. Knowing that Philip never treated that in his fiction, do you know whether he really understood or, could grasp the different dynamic in gay male life?
I was not by any means his first gay friend. Philip had gay friends all his adult life, and was not the least bit homophobic, as they say. I think he liked the idea of my being gay because it gave us more notes to compare.
Sure. See, I had wondered whether that was a component of the friendship in that you weren't, quote unquote, a threat when it came to desiring women, but then, reach that point in the book where we realize he's past all of that, or relinquished that.
I think he was edgy with his fellow heterosexuals for just that reason, though it didn't keep him from having some very interesting friendships with men.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel you owed him this book, his memory? I guess you could frame it as, for whom did you write Here We Are?
Well, not for him, and I kept saying to myself, what Philip would think of this doesn't matter. Mm. I thought that there's a time for reticence, and then there's a time for candor. And I did not write hagiography, and yet the book was born of love for a complicated, not altogether savory, but profoundly alive man.
Mm-hmm.
His treatment of the men he knew, whom he cuckolded in his prime. I mean, it's hard to understand that you would have a secret affair with the woman down the road, and you and your wife would meet for dinner with the woman and her husband, and the fun of it was keeping your wife and your lover's husband in the dark. That's not my idea of good sport, but it was his, I guess. It's an aspect of him that is hard to understand. There was an amoral streak in Philip, and of course, I didn't say that when he was alive. I say that now. He was also a man of great tenderness. Women could not resist him. Really, yeah. He was one of those men like Jack Kennedy, but he had only to look in the direction of a beautiful young person, and it happened.
Yeah. You do mention within the book, I guess, the last significant relationship being with someone less than half his age at that point, and her family's disapproval of the whole shebang.
Yes, I don't say her name ever, but I think that she faced considerable pressure from her family.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, you have that question within the book about the gossipy interest in his life. I mean, should we assume, a writer who gets around is the root of that, or the writer who gets around with people who tend to write angry things about him?
Well, E.L. Doctorow had an interesting, complicated personal life, but nobody cared about it because his fiction didn't lead them to, and absolutely nobody cares about the private life of Don DeLillo. I wondered why Philip was different in this respect. I guess it's because his marriages were tumultuous and because he played the ladies' man and because in book after book there was a confessional aspect by way of Zuckerman or by way of Kepish or by way of Tarnopol. He was laying bare the kingdom of erotic secrets, and people, of course, took it for autobiography, which it was in part.
Mm-hmm.
He was always beginning with himself. That was the first position that he would move off of imaginatively.
Do you look forward to? Oh, sorry. Go on.
Anyhow, there was indeed a lot of gossip that surrounded him. I remember one evening, dinner at the West Street Grill in Litchfield. We were having dinner with Mia Farrow, and somebody passed by and took a photo. I wasn't even sure that he noticed it, but there was that kind of thing, a wish to know his personal life or his erotic secrets, what was going on.
Mm-hmm. I'll ask you about Mia Farrow off mic, if that's okay.
Sure.
I can ask you on mic. We can edit it out if it's too touchy a question. In fact, I'll ask you, and you can tell me whether to cut it or not. Was there a thing between them?
I
don't know.
I definitely will not say. I don't want it on mic. But let's just say Philip did have an affair with another of Frank Sinatra's wives, Ava Gardner.
Yes, that comes up in the book for sure.
Maybe one of Sinatra's wives is enough.
Yeah. I only ask because that American Masters documentary, it just felt like it, but I'm just some schlub out in New Jersey, so I'm not connected to the world enough to know. So, but that's neither here nor there. Maybe she'll come on the show sometime, and I'll avoid bringing it up. Are you looking forward to Blake Bailey's biography?
I certainly am.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be a formidable book, the equal of his wonderful biography of Cheever. And I was writing as a memoir, so I took no account of points of view other than my own. That's what memoir is. Blake has all the points of view. He's interviewed hundreds of people.
Do you feel there's a key to Philip? I mean, you talk about Newark. He talks about Newark and transformative moments and the death of his first wife and so many other things. Do you feel there's a key moment that explains or that opens up everything else?
The grafting of manhood onto that particular childhood was always uneasy and awkward. And it led him to express his childhood, as a lost Garden of Eden. The Weequahic section. And The Plot Against America is a depiction of that Garden of Eden as it succumbs to an authoritarian regime, as it turns from utopia into dystopia.
Yeah, I haven't watched the HBO version of that yet. It just came up at a time that, with the pandemic and everything, we were kind of not in the mood. But I keep feeling like it's something I need to, I say, subject myself to, immerse myself in, I suppose.
Well, they found a marvelous little actor to play Philip. Really, he does nothing with his face. He's like a little Alec Guinness. He can say everything by doing nothing with his face.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always amazed by child performances, how directors get those performances from children.
Yeah. You wonder how much the casting people see in terms of he'll be able to do this, or, she'll be able to convey that without having to.
Yes.
Yeah. It's got to
I
be
think
something.
it must be that acting is as natural as drawing or making music, since little children can do these things.
Mm-hmm. And as I've learned from interviewing enough writers and cartoonists, it's the ones who actually stick with it instead of the ones who play with it that make something of themselves. I'm a dilettante, so I can say that. Anyway,
Yes. Artists are
yeah.
people who stuck with the primal impulses of childhood.
Yeah. Yeah. I stuck with anxiety instead.
Oh, no.
It took me in certain good directions, but yeah, there are inherent limitations to that. Let me ask about your Jewishness growing up you're in Texas, right?
Fort Worth.
Fort Worth. What Jewishness meant there versus, the Jewishness that you encounter with a Bellow, with Roth, with moving to New York. Not Jewishness as in practicing Jewishness, but, what we talk about, being Jewish.
Philip was not the child of immigrants. He was the grandchild of immigrants. Mm-hmm. And his parents were entirely Americanized. Saul Bellow was the child of immigrants, and his parents were not. They were a Yiddish-speaking world. I was, like Philip, the grandchild of immigrants, and what amazes me now is how quickly we were Americanized, how quickly the old identity and the old language were shed, and the new identity and the new language adopted. My grandparents, my mother's parents, both of whom began in Europe speaking Yiddish, spoke English to each other. This is one of the themes I love in Willa Cather's work. Out on the prairie, there are Scandinavians and Germans and Russians and a smattering of French and Germans, all of whom are dropping the cloak of an old identity and embracing a new one. And that's the story of my family, and it's the essential American story, whether you're Vietnamese American, Irish American, Italian, Jewish, of course. What impresses me is the speed with which it happens. One generation is enough.
Oh, I'm first generation American. My father is Romanian, Israeli, American. You would not understand him if he was speaking.
Yes.
This mic, and I have the most generic Northeastern American, perspective and face. So.
Well, what astounded Philip and what he said to me once, I think this is in the book. He said, however many generations going back to the age of Chaucer spoke this language. 30 generations. And then in one generation's time, that language is out, forgotten, gone. It's nothing but Borscht Belt gags. And this impressed him. And he was a great American patriot. Felt strongly that this was the safe place. This was the safest place to be a Jew.
Yeah. How did he handle the last couple of years with the administration? He only experienced a year plus of this.
I was with him the night that Trump won. He was in the hospital. And I came breezing in at about 6 o'clock to his hospital room and said, it's going to be an early night. Hillary's going to take Florida and Pennsylvania. No problem. And he looked at me and said, I'm scared. I think he remains scared. Scared of what a single personality, thus empowered, could wreak upon a whole civilization.
Yeah.
He saw it immediately in the direst historical terms, and he knew that he had spoken as a prophet. Those early chapters of The Plot Against America are so reminiscent of election night in 2016.
Sure. And Exit Ghost has its parallels during the Bush years. Yeah. I recorded with Harold Bloom in January of 2016, and he was already convinced. I said, "What are you reading?" And he said, "It can't happen. It can't happen here," because he was convinced this is where America was going. And I laughed it off. 10 months before the election. "Oh, you have no idea what you're talking about, Harold." And yeah, yes, he showed me.
Unduly pessimistic, but he wasn't.
No.
I'd love to hear your interview with Bloom.
Actually, that's a question I have for you. My opening question to him was what poems he'd want read at his memorial service, because I cut straight to the chase with these things. And he said at the time, I've instructed them to have no memorial service for me. However, if they choose to disregard my wishes, and he starts declaiming Wallace Stevens poems and really bellowing. But my question for you is, you had instructions from Philip about the memorial service. How closely did it hew to his specifications?
Very.
Were you able to?
We tried to, but there's certain people who cannot be controlled when they get to a podium.
Yeah, well,
they just can't be controlled, and it was twice as long as it ought to have been, and there were some grossly inappropriate moments, I thought. The memorial service is something I try to forget. The funeral is something I remember better. Mm-hmm. Maybe now I'm just being quite selfish and frank, because I controlled it, and I said, Philip wants no religious reference. He wants only his own work to be read at the graveside, and people complied with that. So we had only Philip's words at the funeral. Yeah. We had at the memorial. We had the words of Andrew Wiley and others, and
gotcha.
They were.
I went up to Bloom's memorial in January up at Yale, just because they wanted to include some of my interview. They want to include some of the audio, but yes. They disregarded everything and they held one anyway. But yeah, there were a couple of speakers where I thought, well, they knew him far better than I did. I spent 55 minutes with the guy, but this might not be the venue to tell that story. But whatever. I'm again some schlub from New Jersey. I'm not going to judge. And they ran the audio of that part of the podcast where we where Bloom did his thing. Because it was great. He starts out incredibly faint and then just starts building and building and building. And it brought a smile to a lot of people in the audience. So I actually went up to Roth's grave last November. I'd recorded with Daniel Mendelssohn nearby.
I see.
Near Bard. And I had lost my best friend a couple of weeks before and thought, while I'm up here, I should have gone up here and taken a picture for my friend back when he was around. And I went up and kept walking around, wasn't sure within that little Bard cemetery where Philip's grave was, and then saw it from about 20 feet away. And it was like being struck in the chest. It was just this moment of, with everything I'd been going through, and then just seeing. I should have prefaced all this by saying I was conceived while my mom was reading Portnoy's complaint to my dad. So yeah, I go way back.
You're a young man.
with Philip.
You're a very young man.
Yeah. I was born in 1971. It had been out a couple of years, but she told me that story when I was reading the book when I was 17 or 18. Pray to God she's not listening to this episode. So yeah, I've had a long history with Roth. He's actually my white whale for the show. The guy I never even came close to pitching to do this. And I know he never would have done this, but yeah, seeing his grave was just this.
Philip had seen photos of Camus' grave. He was a great admirer of Albert Camus. And Camus was an influence on Nemesis. He reread the play as a way of starting. And Camus' grave looks just like that in a smaller version with the name written crudely as if somebody had done it with his finger. He said to the stonemason, that's what I want. I want it to look as if somebody had just dipped a finger in paint and written my name.
Yeah, I took some pictures. I realized I was standing on his thorax. Is he buried? I don't even know if there was a cremation or whatever the circumstances were. But
no, he was not cremated.
Okay, so yes, I stood over his crotch basically. Yeah. So from where I was standing, taking my picture, I realized.
Did you notice that Hannah Arendt is several yards away?
No, you mentioned that in the book, and I didn't even know she'd been buried there. Otherwise, I would have looked at least for her. But yeah, that's the weird thing about your stuff, Benjamin. I have to say, I've read 4 books of yours, each of them in one day, which it's not like the Proust one was light reading. And yet, I find myself completely, when I start one of your books, I just get completely swept up and figure it's a Saturday. Let me just read this for the next several hours. And, yeah, so just there's so many things, and here we are that jarred me, including the Hannah Arendt thing. I thought, I should go drive back up to Bard and take a look. But
my agent, Wendy Strothman, said after reading the manuscript of Here We Are, well, are you sure you don't want to write a longer book? But I felt a 400-page elegy would just be too elegiac. I felt the book had to be short. And when Jack Miles, one of my early readers, read it, he said, "You've got the right length. These eight chapters are the right length. Any more, and it would become lapsing into biography."
Yeah. Were there anecdotes you were hesitant about including, either that made it in or things you decided doesn't need to be in there?
Well, sure. I think maybe I do remember something that got edited out, which I won't talk about, because I thought it was just me bloviating and was not essential. But I did pretty much write the book I meant to write, and the conversation between Philip and me goes on, particularly the hilarity. Death is really powerless to end a conversation like that.
Yeah. That's one of the things I realized losing that good friend of mine, that I was driving up to Mendelssohn, as a matter of fact, for that podcast, and didn't know what the first question would be, how I would open the conversation, and then just started thinking about how I would talk about it with Tom, and oh no, that's exactly how this would work. This is the person who helped inform my life. He's still speaking to me, afterward.
Oh yes, was he older than you?
Only by a year. It was just
I
a sudden death, but he was the person with whom I could most easily share anything, and vice versa.
I'm sorry.
Oh, it was part of a very difficult stretch, beginning with, not that I was close with any of these people, but Harold Bloom, Clive James, Philip dying a year earlier, Sandy McClatchy a little while. In fact, Sandy's memorial service was the day after Philip died, I believe. And it was
indeed. That's the reason I didn't go to Sandy's memorial at the American Academy. It was immediately after Philip's death.
Yeah. When we finish up, I will get your address. I'll send you something I wrote about that whole experience, and it's got an excerpt of my conversation with Sandy, who, again, I only met once, but apparently made a decent impression upon back then. But yeah, there was just this stretch, and then it all leads into the world falling apart in these last few months.
You may have noticed that the dedicatee of my Proust biography is James Merrill. Who was a dear friend of mine, and it was through James that I got to know Sandy all those years ago. This is going all the way back to before you were born. No, hang on. No. Going all the way back to when you were about 5 or 6 or 7.
Oh, thank God! When Star Wars came out. Okay.
I can. It was the fall of '76 when I met James, and when I met Richard Howard, and all of these older men were instrumental, sort of had their share in breaking me into the world. A process that happened very slowly, and I came to everything rather late in life. I published a first book when I was 42, and a second when I was 43. But I was still an amateur writer. There was a long period, and then I published another novel in 2008. And by then, Philip's influence on me was very strong.
Yeah. And you were a homemade cosmopolitan, I believe.
Yes.
His description.
I said, what do you mean by that? He said, well, you speak French, but with an atrocious accent. Homemade cosmopolitan.
Yeah. Tell me, when it comes to those relationships, do they tend to be with people a generation older?
Yes, this is a theme in my life, fascination with my elders.
Yeah.
When I meet people who instinctively mistrust or dislike their elders, I know that's not a person I can particularly get on with. Now I'm an elder myself, and I meet students who have exactly the same affectionate relationship to authority and to the older generation, and people who instinctively mistrust or dislike it. So it's too late for me to be influenced now by anyone, but I was influenced not by my contemporaries. As a young man, I was influenced by the older generation.
Yeah. Honestly, and it's not to say anything about your age, but that's the nature of this show. I much prefer someone 10, 15, 20, 40 years older than me than somebody under 40, basically, just because they've seen more, they've seen the cycles go by. I've sat down with Jules Pfeiffer. I've drove many hours to sit down with Jules for an hour and just revel in that, and then drive home from the end of Long Island back to New Jersey.
What a
I
wonderful
get,
record. What a wonderful
yeah.
record of conversations you have.
Oh gosh, it's a story I've told a bunch of times, but in fact, at Sandy's memorial, um, before I got there too early because I was coming from another podcast because that's all I do. Um, and I bumped into at a cafe around the corner from the academy. Um, there was a couple of older people there wearing Sandy McClatchy buttons, and it turned out it was two of his sisters.
Oh,
And
really?
I'd introduced myself, and we made a little conversation. They asked how I knew him, and I mentioned I'd only met him once. We recorded a conversation in Stonington for the podcast that I do, and they asked you have a conversation with Sandy on tape that we've never heard. I'm like, oh my god. I sort of writing out the URL. I had these little postcards with me. I put it on. I realized they were going to get to hear their brother again
Yes.
in this
How wonderful.
crazy free flowing conversation. But it was same thing. In fact, we started a little bit with mortality because he was coming off of a few years after his prostate cancer diagnosis, or his cure for that. But it was, yeah, it's this thing that I figure I can have a day job and do something like this to feel like I'm actually contributing something.
Hi. Am I right that Sandy had some sort of military experience in his youth? ROTC?
I don't know. I think he got out of it um, by teaching.
Aha.
I think that was the thing. Yeah, he was eligible for the draft, but by teaching, I don't even remember if it was like college level or like grade school or something that kept him out for 3 years and got him past going to Vietnam. Because I don't know if I could have imagined him,
Well,
in that milieu.
that would have been a different Sandy. But
Yeah.
he did have a kind of military crispness and cogency.
Yeah, because I was about to say I couldn't imagine it, and then I thought of just again my one experience, and I thought, there was a certain macho thing going on there.
Oh,
Maybe he could
yes.
have.
I sometimes had the impulse to salute. I saw him.
Yeah, he was. It was a very strange day when we got together. I had recorded earlier that day up in Connecticut with the cartoonist Bill Griffith, the guy who does Zippy the Pinhead. So,
Uh-huh.
yeah, older guy who was this amazing and strange figure, and then drove to Stonington and recorded with Sandy, and then drove back to New Jersey and thought, what the hell am I doing? I'm spending like 10 hours on a Sunday just doing this. And then I thought, oh, that's what I'm doing. I'm sitting down with guys who are legends in their field, people who've seen the world go by that, have a good perspective on things and make for good conversation. So yeah, it's weird, but if I will fill you in on details of my day job later on, which will explain why I need something like this to keep me going.
I see why you keep it going, because you have the gift of drawing out people, maybe even causing them to say more than they meant to say.
If we were doing this in person, you would have totally dished on something that you would never have thought you would say otherwise. It kills me that we have to do these remotely, but that's pandemic life.
There are certain very, very gifted journalists that have this extraordinary knack of getting people to say more than they meant to. I'm sure that the young Didion was like that.
Oh, God.
She people thought that somebody so small and ladylike could not possibly be a cobra.
Little did they know. Yeah, she's someone I would have loved to even try to reach out to, but everybody who's tangentially connected told me, no, don't even try.
She can't speak anymore.
Yeah, this is a few years ago when it was a potential, but no, that's that's the downside of reaching out for people who are, almost or more than double my age. But
she and Vivian are the same age, and Vivian is just so undimmed, exactly the person I met back in the 1970s.
I will hit you up for contact info after this.
She'd love it, and she is just a magical conversationalist, which Didion Well, apparently was not. Didion was a magical writer,
Yeah.
particularly those early pieces, which were against the grain of their times. The thing about Slouching Towards Bethlehem is that instead of being a zeitgeist book, it's the opposite. She's against the grain of the 1960s
Yeah.
when she writes those pieces. Very interesting figure.
One of the things that fascinated me, not the great one she's known for from that collection, but the very first one about the murder in California.
Yes. Is the car on fire?
Yeah. And everything. And I've been pals with Ron Rosenbaum for a couple of decades
Yeah.
And reading it, I thought, oh, I get where Ron comes from, because this is not just in terms of tone and everything, but just mechanically what she was doing in that piece of journalism. I was like, I get Ron's Bloomian precursor here. I see that, this is a writer who could shape someone, into the sort of nonfiction he was doing.
Yes.
But yeah, that's, again, me and my older generation that I adore. But favorite Roth novel?
Well, as I say in the book, I think it's The Human Stain in which he gets deepest into the American grain. And he does so by getting to the essential American subject, which is race. Mm-hmm. The essential American subject, by creating a white-seeming black man who crosses the color line and lives as a Jew, a Jewish intellectual in a university setting, and severs himself from the past. It gets at that basic American theme of race, and also gets at another American specialty, which is making oneself up from scratch. Mm-hmm. Severance from birthright in favor of some romantic idea of who you might be.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'd wondered, I know you said it in the book, and I'd wondered if there's a difference between your favorite and most important, I guess.
I think I said that my favorite passage is the one at the Jersey Shore in Sabbath Theater where Mickey dives down and brings up a handful of sand to prove to his older brother that he's been to the bottom. And I suppose there's just a very private reason, which is that I lost my own brother in an untimely way, my own older brother. This was something deep-seated Philip and I had in common. The same family configuration, mother, father, and two boys with a sizable age gap between them.
And you were both the younger?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And an older brother we adored and who tolerated us, older brother.
Yeah. Do you feel that my pet theory that Sabbath Theater seeds all the novels that come after?
He felt so strongly about that book that he said, if I had to give up all my books but one, I'd be satisfied to have Sabbath Theater.
It really does seem to contain all the other post novels from there, just in terms of just threads, themes, the various ways the subjects that he would tackle subsequently.
Well, I can't speak for all of them, but I know that American Pastoral comes out of a decision to create a protagonist as clean as Mickey was dirty. Mm-hmm. And that's Swede Lvov.
Yeah.
And then to plunge him into the American berserk with a daughter whose self-righteousness leads her to blow up a post office. Yeah. He'd been thinking about that for years, ever since his friends, Leonard and Jean Boudin, their daughter, Kathy, who was part of the Weather Underground, committed a murder. And he didn't know what to do with the material until, well, I guess this is the way art works. Two things that seem disparate suddenly come together. The idea of Swede Lvov and the idea of the girl who blew up the post office. Making her his daughter was the catalytic moment in his imagination.
I was so thankful to read that in the book, given, I pretend to write, and there are things that I've let sit for decades, and I had that moment of, oh, Philip Roth had things that sat for years and years and didn't know what to do with. I don't feel quite as well, as though all that stuff was wasted in its
Yes.
way. I lay down and the feeling went away, but,
The terrorist girl who comes out of the bosom of Jewish privilege, that was with him for decades before he knew what to do with it.
Yeah. Everyman? Was that I think it's one of the first you mentioned that you were involved in. It's a book I return to every year until the year of his death. I would read it every year around, well, when I would be visiting my wife's family down in Louisiana, I would take that book out and read it over a day or so.
It germinated out of his experience of Saul Bellow's funeral.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, Bellow's sons were all very angry with him. They felt that he pilfered from their grief in his first scene. The son shaking uncontrollably. That was Adam Bellow.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Adam may have written something somewhere. Was it in the Times? Attacking Philip for that. Every man. You wouldn't have expected Philip Roth to create a protagonist with no name other than Every Man.
Yeah.
Maybe some allegorical impulse got stronger in him. In any case, he was death haunted by that point. He was, that phrase from Freud that Bloom used to quote, and to make friends with the necessity of dying. I think Philip was attempting in those later short books to make friends with the necessity of dying. In each one, Nemesis, of course, Nemesis and Indignation, Exit Ghost. All those books are about the hard task of making friends with the necessity of dying.
I'm sorry. I'm just reminiscing over decades of reading these myself. Did you retain any tokens of his? I know, you mentioned not wanting to be part of the auction for the estate or anything, but beyond letters or anything, do you have
Well, Philip was very generous to me in his life and in death. The one object that he very much wanted me to have is his map of Newark, the map of Newark that he took to college with him, and it was carefully pieced back together after it broke apart at the seams, and is now hanging. It hung in his apartment, and now hangs in my front hall.
That's beautiful.
And I look at it every day, and I sort of, it's a way of saying hello to Philip each time I see it.
I'll send you a picture of it. I have Joe Ciardello, the illustrator. I have his New York Times book review drawing of Philip from, yeah. I was recording with Joe, and afterwards we were going through his flat files, and I saw that one. I said, if you are ever selling your originals, please let me know. And I ended up buying that and his Henry Miller. So every day when I walk down the stairs to my office, I have, and again, I will send you a picture of this.
Please do.
Joe's drawing of Philip. I guess as a last question, I just want to ask, based on one quote from the book, where you fall on this. The disparity between who we are on paper and who we really are is what has dumbfounded American writers and produced a literature second to none. You feel you talked about that in terms of the human stain.
Yes, well, who we are on paper, who we are in our founding documents, what they claim and what the American reality has been, is what is characteristic. This is a national identity that one has not in terms of blood or soil or any kind of belonging other than assent to the Constitution. That is what makes an American. And the idealism of that, of those founding documents, comes up against the disillusioning reality of what has happened on these shores, what continues to happen. But I think that American writers in general are heartbroken patriots who see more of the disparities than their ordinary. Think of Hawthorne. Think of Whitman. This is what makes us an essentially romantic civilization. We believe that the ideal is what is most real. And the ideal is continually mocked by the realities of slavery and of the genocide of Native peoples and of the 100 years of Jim Crow and all these unpleasant reminders of the gap between the ideal and the real. But I think that the greatest American writers have operated in that gap. So I think that's what maybe makes American literature different. People I talk to in Europe feel very strongly that American literature is its own thing. It doesn't have anything to do with British literature, and they're much more interested in American literature than British literature.
Yeah.
Much more in continental Europe. And I think they're on to something. It's this tormented relationship between who we're supposed to be and on paper and who we are. E.L. Doctorow used to say, on paper, we are the shining light unto the world. On paper, we are.
Yeah. That's funny. I'm glad I asked it because I was looking at it so much from the personal perspective instead of the national one. And that's...
I should have been clearer in that passage.
No, it's my own blindered sense of this stuff. That's what's so great. It's because one of the questions I had, especially after your Proust and Naples declared, and it's nothing that you can answer, I'm sure, but whether people are capable of change, whether we're capable of becoming something better or something worse. Within the Proust biography, you show it within the context of why the book is 3,000 pages, because we need to see people change over time. And then within Naples Declared, especially in the Vico section, there's that question, which has set me pondering for the last couple of weeks on, A, whether we can change, B, whether, unfortunately, we can change for the worse.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Vico is the first philosopher since antiquity for whom change is all there is. No realm of being, only the realm of becoming.
Yeah.
He's the philosopher who takes history seriously and sees all human activity as within the stream of history. That really is anti-Cartesian and something new.
Do you feel you changed? Do you feel you are who you were as an essence? Or do you feel that you've, over the course of this life, or maybe just over the course of this friendship, become someone different than you started out as?
Oh, yes. I think Vico is right. Change is the law of life. And if you mean this, if you mean here we are, I'm not who I would have been without Philip. Mm-hmm. There's no doubt about that. I'm not who I would have been without Naples. I could say that too, in a less heartfelt way. It goes without saying that I'm not who I would have been without my family. So these books were all variously contracted debts of gratitude.
I'm awfully glad you wrote them. So,
thank you.
Benjamin. I'm going to say goodbye, but I think you and I need to talk more in future. So get to work on another book. Actually, do you have plans? Are you working on something? Is there I know it's right after Here We Are, but have you pondered what comes next?
I'm writing a biography of Willa Cather.
Ooh. Don't say anything else, because it's always a jinx when authors talk about their work. So on the strength of that, I want to thank you for coming on, and thank you for sharing some of this friendship with me.
Thank you, Gil. It's been, for me, an unforgettable conversation. Just marvelous.
And that was Benjamin Taylor. His new book is Here We Are, My Friendship with Philip Roth, published by Penguin. I, as you can tell, enjoyed the living heck out of it, and I hope you will too. Even if you're not a huge Roth fan, it is a beautiful exploration of friendship, the writing life, and so much more. I also hope you check out some of Benjamin's previous work. As I mentioned, I really dug Proust, The Search, and Naples Declared, as well as his recent memoir, The Hue and Cry at Our House. Also, like I said during the episode, don't know what it says about me, but all four of those books, including Here We Are, were one-day reads for me. I thought Proust was going to take longer, and over the course of a Saturday, I found, why don't I just keep reading? And 180 pages later, boom. So the next morning I started Naples Declared, and by the afternoon I had finished that one too. They're very readable, but also very, very good and thoughtful pieces of writing. You can also check out more of Benjamin's work at his website, benjamintaylorauthor.com. He's on Twitter as Felix Memel, a reference to his novel, I think. That's FELIXMEHMEL. He's also on Instagram as Benjamin Taylor 430, but doesn't seem to have posted anything there. There'll be links to all of these in the show notes. Now, in the before time, this is when I would ask you for Patreon or PayPal support for the podcast. Don't need it. Don't want your money. The only support I want from you guys is emails, letters, postcards. Tell me what you like and don't like about the show, but please don't give me your money right now. if you can spare anything, there are plenty of writers and artists in need. You can find their Patreons, Kickstarters, GoFundMes, Indiegogos, tip jars, whatever. There are a lot of other people in need too, and you'll find GoFundMes for people in really dire circumstances and straits. They need money much more than a pharmaceutical lobbyist who has a part-time podcast. On top of that, there are bail funds, food banks, and other charities that are really in need right now between the pandemic and the police violence against protests. So what I'm saying is, if you're in a position to help people right now, please help them. All of that said, the one thing that I was doing for the Patreon and other supporters of the podcast was giving them copies free of my first zine, which came out about 25 years too late, called Haiku for Business Travelers. It is a 32-page book of my writing, poetry, photography, and podcast excerpts. And if you want one, it's free. Just drop me a line or visit haikuforbusinesstravelers.com and hit me up that way. If you want, you can kick in a few bucks for postage and production, but honestly, this is not a money-making thing. It's just me sharing my art, such as it is. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. Now, you've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.